And it's an interesting topic which we are going to talk about today, passwordless authentication. But before I start, I just want to congratulate you, Kasam, for attaining the MVP award. Many congratulations, and I hope you can continue having this badge for the next for the years to come. And I'm sure you will be able to.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot.
All right, so let's get started, guys. So as you can understand, this is all about passwordless authentication. And just to give you a brief introduction about myself, my name is Zoeb. I work for Microsoft as a solution engineer, and I'm a worldwide SME into identity and Azure compute. Today, I'm going to talk about passwordless authentication with you, wherein we'll touch base on some of the key aspects of passwords, why they are important, or what makes them vulnerable. And we'll also talk about some of the tools which Microsoft has, which can potentially take an organization from to be make an organization independent on passwords. Yes, you heard it right. Independent on passwords. That means we can be in a world wherein there is no passwords at all. I'll share with you how you can achieve it. I'll also talk about the different tool sets which will help you achieve it. But let's take it step by step. So first of all, I just want to talk about a little bit on how attack happen. From an organization perspective, and I'll use my whiteboard a little bit here to demonstrate it to you for a typical attack scenario. And then I would like to hear your thoughts about, what do you think, why an attack happened in this scenario, and what could have been done better, or what were the primary causes for an attack. Now, as you can see in this kind of scenario, we've got three tiers, which is your tier 0, tier 1, and tier 2. Tier 0 is really your domain controllers. In today's world, we might want to include Azure Active Directory administrators also as a part of tier 0. Tier 1, from an organization perspective, it is all your member servers, application servers, basically the server layer of the organization. That is something which you would call out to be a tier 1. And tier 2 is something which is your client machines, Windows 10, Windows 11, mobile devices, Android, iPhones, anything, Macintosh, any client which you're using is essentially a part of tier 2. Now, as an attacker, the attacker never ever directly goes and manages to compromise domain controllers. As an attacker, he always tries to compromise tier 2. Okay, tier 2 is basically your clients. So as an attacker, I my first attempt will always be to compromise some of my clients. Okay, so this is what I will try to do: compromise client machines of any environment, and then try to elevate to tier 1 and tier 0. Basically, that's the strategy which an attacker would always try and take. Now, how he would go about is he will not attack some of the well IT aware users like you. Okay, he would potentially attack a client machine to start with. Now, how it's crucial to understand how this kind of attack happens. So the majority of the attack happens either using malware or using some kind of phishing, which constitute to about 69% of the attack, as per the survey from Verizon. Now, when this type of attack is happening, which is about 69% of the attack, when it comes to phishing, even in phishing, the attacker is trying to compromise the user credential. Now, other ways of attacking or other ways of him getting into the client is through password spray. It could be phishing. So I'll just make a note of it just for, so it could be some password spray attack. It could be phishing attacks, or it could be some malware. Uh, on some situation, it might be zero-day attacks also. Okay, but we are not focusing on many of these. But I'll tell you what we are focusing it on. Okay, so there could be many reasons why this would be done. Now, in general, the concept behind password spray is, as an attacker, I will try to just randomly attempt passwords against a user. So, And this attempts can be based on some social engineering also. Like social engineering is very targeted, wherein I know you, I probably know your social media, I probably know your birth date, and I probably know your son's daughter's name, these kind of things, and then I try to attack you. So, or it could be some just random passwords, like p at the rate 55wrd. People use it very often. It could be Monday at 1 to 3. People use it very often. So the phishing or password spray attack could be in multiple ways. This is what the attacker will try to do. Now, typically, what happens is, as he compromises one machine, he might want to compromise some of the other machine. This is something which we call as lateral movement, wherein an attacker, after getting into one machine, he gets into another machine. There are multiple ways he would get into another machine. The best way for him to get into another machine is by knowing the local admin password. Okay. If in case you're not randomizing your local admin passwords, and if he manages to steal, like for example, if an attacker compromises 10 machines, and generally about 10% of the machines in an organizations have local admin password, which means if there are 100 machines, maybe 10 users out of those 100 users are local admin. So if he compromises 10 users, maybe one of them is local admin. And through that, he might try to move laterally, okay, after knowing the password. So he will move laterally from one machine to another. Now, what might happen here is, as he's moving laterally, he reaches a machine where a tier 1 admin was probably logging in, like probably this machine, which was used by tier 1 admin. So as the attacker reaches this machine, okay, he is going to elevate himself to tier 1. Now, why he's able to do it is because this machine has similar local admin credentials as some of the other machines, and he is using the same machine to access his email, his browser, everything, and access tier 1. He might be accessing it through jump post also, but whatever, he's accessing it from the same machine, and then the attacker would try to compromise a tier 1. Or the worst scenario could be he's using the same machine to access the tier 0 also. This is how he would potentially attack a tier 0.
Yes.
And when this happens, what this means is, my if tier 0 is compromised, that means your entire ecosystem is compromised, which means your entire environment gets compromised. So few things to note here is, the attack originated from the client, it jumped into tier 1, it escalated into tier 1, and then it escalated into tier 0. So he started by moving laterally, then he started doing escalations, and then he finally moved to tier 0. So this is a typical attack trend which you will see. Okay. I just want to wait for a few seconds for any questions if you might have, and I'm going to switch back to my presentation. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to move back to my presentation. Now, if you observe this scenario, there were three important factors which caused this to happen. Okay, you might say that the problem was the user moving laterally. The problem was the user elevation. Okay, and some people might say the problem was because they were not using dedicated workstation to administer their domain controllers or their tier 1 servers. All of this is right. But what you might have understood is it started from the word tier 2, which is your client. It always starts from the client because clients are most susceptible to attacks. Now, amongst all of this, one thing which was common is the passwords. So the password compromise led to environment compromise. So amongst this entire ecosystem, the most important thing which happens to be for any organization is passwords. Okay. Now, another thing with this is, you could say that we have detection tools and all of that. That is fine. You might have Defender for endpoint, you might have Defender for identity for to be able to detect these kind of attacks. But I'm not talking about detection. I'm moreover talking about prevention and what could be done proactively. Okay. Now, this comes to us with a question about passwords. So first of all, one thing is certain, like everyone in this meeting and everyone in the world, we hate passwords. We hate password because you can't put password like 1234, right? This is the reason why we hate passwords, because it is difficult to remember. And a lot of times your organizations might ask you to choose complex password. And then above that, above choosing complex passwords, they might ask you to, not repeat your password. So they're trying to maintain some kind of password history. So, you know, it it makes it very difficult for an admin to be able to, not for an admin, but for a user to be able to remember these complex passwords. Now, what we end up doing as a normal user, we end up repeating the same complex password in multiple platforms. Okay, so basically, all of this, what it means is I am using, so I'm compromising security here because I'm using the same password for my work, then I'm using similar password for my personal stuff, then I'm using similar password for some of the social medias. Basically, even if the organization enforces complexity, we are trying to work around it through some or the other ways, which is again creates a problem. So, what you end up doing is you choose some easy numbers which get out of complexity, and then you try to go ahead with it. So, that's the problem. But in all, the key message is uh, we hate passwords. Okay, as an end user, we hate password. But there is one person in this entire ecosystem who loves passwords. That is the attacker. If someone is on unmute, please mute yourself. Thank you. Yeah. So as a attacker, the attacker loves passwords. As per the survey from Verizon, 81% of the breaches involved leveraged stolen or weak passwords. 81% of the breaches involved leveraged stolen or weak passwords. This tells you how much attackers love passwords. And I'll tell you another importance before I jump on to our subject. Uh, in general, we are living in this world of virtual identity. So by virtual identity, I mean it's everything is virtual. Your emails are virtual. You meet someone, most of the times you are meeting them virtually. We are living in a world of virtual identity wherein our identity compromise can be associated with your password compromise. So if in case your account gets compromised, your identity gets compromised. Imagine someone stealing your phone. He's not stealing your phone, he's stealing your identity, because he opens your WhatsApp, he sends someone a message, some nasty message, that other person is going to believe that it is sent by you. So an account compromise or a password compromise is not just that application compromise. It's a identity compromise. Your identity gets compromised. We are not in the world like 20 years before wherein things were more physical in nature. We are living in a virtual world. So again, all of this entire ecosystem becomes extremely important for us. Now, coming back to another point which is related to MFA. There is one thing which adds a sense of security to us is multi-factor authentication. So what do I really enjoy, right? Like when I'm doing net banking, I put in my password, and then I'm prompted for an OTP, which is a unique OTP which is sent through my mobile, and then probably to my email also. And then again, it has a validity, which is of 5 minutes probably or few seconds. This in itself prevents 99.9% of the attack. That's 1,000 times safer than password. 1,000 times safer than password. Okay. Of course, there is a level of 0.08 which could still be attacked, but that's 1,000 times safer than what you might have with MFA. So MFA. The key message here is MFA is better than passwords alone, and it can prevent your attacks by 99.9% times. Now, moving on, one thing which comes always is when it comes to more security, one thing which you associate with more security is complexity, and one thing which you associate with less security is inconvenience. Okay, so for example, where does password fit into this inconvenience versus security chart? If you see, passwords is something which is right in the middle. Password is not very convenient, to be honest. It's not convenient. It's not convenient because you have to choose strong password. The organizations tend to add restrictions, which really makes it difficult for it to be like very convenient. So that's why it's not convenient. Is it secure? Definitely not. As I said, it is in this graph. Passwords is something which is a part of low security in this entire chain. What is the alternative which we have? The alternative we have is multi-factor authentication, which is a brilliant alternative, which can prevent attacks up to 99.2%, which is 1,000 times safer than passwords. So of course, it's very secure. But is that convenient? No, right? Because imagine a scenario wherein now I'm not solving problem with the features which I'm going to talk about in net banking, but I'm giving you an example of net banking just because we relate it easily. So imagine if you want to open your banking website or net banking application on your browser, you do not have phone for some reason with you, okay? Or maybe your phone is switched off. You need to get a OTP. You can't get a hand to the OTP because your phone is off. Okay, or for some reason it is, I'm a very lazy person. My phone is in the other room. I'm just too lazy to go walk to the other room to get the OTP. That's how I am. I'm lazy. So it's not very convenient. But you would all agree that it's secure, definitely. But it's not convenient. So that's where it brings. Now, where does passwordless authentication comes in is somewhere secure, which is security focused, and it is convenient also. So both these things come together when it comes to passwordless authentication. Now, there's no one tool for passwordless authentication. There are multiple set of tools which I'm going to talk about next. Okay, so moving on to the next slide, which is about the zero trust pillars. So this is the zero trust pillar, which is built by Microsoft. And as you can see, the second pillar in the zero trust is all about verifying the identity. So in the verifying for identity phase, as you can see, there is strong identity is verified and enforced. Passwords are eliminated in favor of biometrics. This is something which becomes extremely crucial for us, and that's what we are discussing. So from this entire zero trust framework, what I'm trying to target here is basically on verifying the identity and eliminating the need of passwords and potentially replacing it with something like biometrics. Okay, I see there are a few questions, but I'm going to take questions, okay, guys, in few seconds. So if in few minutes, if you have any questions, just put it in the chat and I'll try to take them. Now, so that's the zero trust principles and the zero trust pillars, and that's where passwordless comes in. Now let's talk about what passwordless brings to the organization. Before I get into tool, what is passwordless going to give you? So by you, I mean it could be a user. Okay, what does passwordless give it to the user? What does passwordless give it to an organization? Okay, so from a value to the user perspective, the most important thing is user doesn't have to remember the password. So I don't have to remember password for my email. And if in case I have multiple credentials for my organizations, I don't have to remember passwords for that. So that's something which is good for me. I don't have to change password also. There is no need to change password. Value to the organization. The, the user credentials cannot be broken. It cannot be stolen or it cannot be violated. It is very difficult to do all of this. That's the benefit which passwordless is going to bring it to you. Now, there are three tools, namely, which focuses on passwordless offering or password replacement offering from Microsoft. The first tool is Windows Hello for Business. Windows Hello for Business is basically a tool for your desktops, laptops, which can give you a seamless single sign-on experience without a password. Windows Hello for Business typically uses your biometric, your retina, your fingerprint, or it can use your PIN to authenticate you. Then you have your Microsoft Authenticator app. So that is another tool which you can use for mobile devices, wherein it can work without password, wherein you get some kind of challenge, and that challenge, if you fulfill, you're able to log in. And of course, you have these FIDO2 security keys. FIDO2 security devices are like external devices which you can use. It is typically used by mobile user. By mobile user, I mean users who's traveling, user who's not dedicated to a workstation. Those kind of users would use FIDO2 security keys. Okay. I'm just going to have a look at the chat and see if there's any question which I'm going to address later. If there is some questions which I am going to address later, then I'll not um, do it. Okay. Why the passwordless auth introduced when there is a MFA prevention? So yes, I will touch on this point. So, but to answer it to you right now, passwordless authentication has come in. It's not a replacement for MFA. It is something which complements MFA, and I'm going to tell you how passwordless is also MFA based. Okay, so it's a multi-factor authentication kind of a tool, but generally the MFA based tools which you had, it is very inconvenient. A lot of times those were taking a lot of time for you to log on. So there was some inconvenience involved. That's why passwordless authentication is something which helps you. Uh, Yeah, so that's a good question, Manish. I will answer it in the last part of my session, wherein I'm going to discuss about tier zero. So Manish is asking about tier zero attacks. Yeah, about the PIN, I'm going to answer. Biometric hash is compromised. Yes, that's an interesting one, right? What if the biometric hash gets compromised? I will tell you about that as well. Okay, now let's move on. Okay, so password replacement offerings, these are the three offerings. What I'm going to do is first, I'm going to tell you about what are the different phases in which an organization can go from, um, like from a starting phase perspective and the end goal perspective. Like how does an organization start with these offerings and where does it end? What is the end goal? So that is something which I'm going to discuss briefly. Now, from a Microsoft's passwordless strategy perspective, there are four phases in which this offering goes. Okay. The first phase is basically deployment of password replacement offering, which is what I discussed in the slide earlier, which is Windows Hello for Business, Authenticator app, FIDO2 security devices. Basically, you deploy them, and this is the first phase. The second phase is where you reduce user visible password surface area, wherein I am using both of them, but I'm trying to improve my environment to be able to more password less friendly. The third is transitioning into passwordless, wherein passwords still exist, but they're not being used. And the fourth is where I eliminate the passwords completely. So I delete the passwords completely. Okay. Now let's discuss this one by one. Okay. So in the first phase, wherein I'm deploying password replacement offering, I'm deploying alternatives like Windows Hello for Business that coexist, okay, with my present password tools or with my present infrastructure. So I'm not making any change. I'm just making my environment ready in the first phase wherein I'm putting in something which will coexist with my present offerings. Okay. Uh, this is the early stage. Okay, so it's all about deploying alternative and allowing users some time to get used to it. The second phase, which is a reduce user visible password surface area, it's all about in your environment, how do you improve your entire life cycle of users identity, which includes provisioning of accounts, setting up brand new devices, using the account devices to access websites, recovery, etc., and ensure these work with password replacement offerings, which is our goal. Okay, so the goal here of this phase is to really achieve a state where the user knows that he has a password, but he hardly uses it. Okay, so this state helps decondition users from providing a password anytime a password prompt shows on their computer. This is how passwords are phished, by the way. So users would be prompted for password, and then the users would enter the username and password, and that's how they get phished. So the focus of passwordless is the same, and that is what we are trying to achieve in stage 2. Is basically we want to make users used to not providing passwords and instead using some automation or biometrics. The third part is transition to passwordless deployment. Okay, so now what has happened is still the two phases is some of the user visible password areas are replaced. Now in the third phase, what we are saying is that the user password surface has been eliminated. The next phase for the organization is to transition into a passwordless deployment and move to a world where a user never types a password, never changes their password. In fact, the user does not even know what their password is. This is the state which we are trying to achieve in state 3. However, in this state also the password exists. Okay. Now, in this case, what it means is the organization deploys policies that the user never sees the password credential provided. It never uses them to sign in. It never uses passwords basically. So what he's using is he's using Windows Hello for Business as a single sign-on to Azure Active Directory. It forces authentication using either FIDO security keys or using the Azure Authenticator app. So third phase is really about smoothing our processes, ensuring everything works without passwords, with password existence still there. Okay. And the last phase is to eliminate the passwords. So this is where we eliminate the password from the identity directory. This is the final frontier. Delete the passwords from the identity directory where passwords simply do not exist. So here we are living in the world wherein passwords do not exist at all. Okay. Now let's talk about a little bit about Windows Hello for Business. And I'll talk about all these three tools which we are discussing here, and then we'll move on. So from a Windows Hello for Business perspective, Windows Hello for Business is the primary tool or one of the main tools which is going to help you from a passwordless strategy perspective. Okay, this technology has been around since 2016, I believe. Uh, Prior to 2016, there was a concept of smart cards, usage of smart cards, which was working to some extent on a similar technology. It was not biometric based, though. It was more certificate based. Windows Hello for Business also, to a lot of extent, is certificate based. But we have really moved, from carrying additional smart cards to deploying this in the same chip. Now, let's understand the basics. What does this do? Okay, what does Windows Hello for Business do for you? It allows users to sign in into their devices with biometrics or PIN. Like what kind of biometrics? Biometrics could be your face. It could be your retina. It could be your fingerprint. Okay. These are some of the biometrics which you would use to sign into your machines. It does not need a password. It will use your facial recognition or it can use a PIN. So PIN is something which you're typing manually. Okay, it's not similar to password, it's different. How different it is, I'm going to talk in the next slide. But you can either use PIN or you can use biometric to unlock or to log in. Now, unlike 2FA, so in 2FA, what happens is when you're logging in 2FA, what is happening is a user is logging into a machine. Okay, after he enters his password, he's prompted for MFA. Okay, then he's either getting a OTP. Okay, so he's getting a OTP on the phone. Then he's entering the OTP. Then there is a separate verification mechanism which happens for the OTP, and then finally he's able to log in. Windows Hello for Business is also 2FA, by the way, and I'll tell you how it is 2FA later. But in this part which I said, which is the traditional part, it really makes it difficult, for you to log in, because then you have to remember your password and then you have to type the OTP in its time frame, which can be something time consuming basically. Now, the problem which we are seeing is passwords are increasingly becoming problematic, and then they need to go away. And that's why passwords are are becoming more and more difficult. Now, there is another conversation basically, like, what kind of passwords are secure, you might ask me. So the like if I have to tell you in a very blunt and simple way, any password which you can remember and which you can share is insecure. So no matter how big that password is, if you can remember it and if you can share it, then it's phishable. Okay. So someone else might also remember it, someone else might see it, capture it. So that's phishable. That's why what we are trying to do here is with Windows Hello for Business, we are trying to replace your passwords with a private key. Okay. So as you might understand, there are two types of algorithms, symmetric and asymmetric key algorithms, which is used for encryption. Now, asymmetric key encryption uses something called as a public and private key pair. Private key remains always with the person who owns it, and public key remains with the person. Public key is public, basically. So what we are trying to do here is we are trying to replace your passwords with private key, and we are really using asymmetric encryption. And the user is able to unlock this using their gestures, which I discussed. So basically, using your retina, using your face, using your fingerprint or PIN, you're able to unlock and able to log in. Now, it is very important, and some of you might ask, like, what if this private key gets stolen? That's a very good question because that's kind of your password. Okay. Now, what happens is this private key is stored in your hardware in a device in a component called as TPM. I think the TPM's full form is Trusted Platform Module. Maybe I'm mistaken, but it is stored in TPM, which is separate to the operating system. And then there is a link between your gesture and this TPM, which kind of enforces and secures your private key into that piece of hardware, which is inbuilt into your operating system. So basically, what we are doing is similar to how smart cards were being used earlier, wherein we were using smart card to log in, and the private key was stored on an external USB disk or an external USB. What we are doing now is that's an inbuilt USB into your hardware, and then we are using this to store your private key, and then you're using this to log in. So that's basically what Windows Hello for Business does for you. Okay. And the most important part to remember is that the the keys are ideally generated right from the generation phase. They are generated in the TPM and it remains in the TPM. Okay. And it is specific to the device. It's not that it is there for the user. It is specific for the device. It's a device based thing. Okay. Now, what does the identity provider do? So the identity provider maps the user's public key to the user account using the negotiation. And as I said, the private key never leaves the system. So it never leaves the TPM. So that's how this is happening. And of course, the private key needs to get unlocked. And this unlock gesture is nothing but Windows Hello for Business, wherein you can unlock it using the different methods, which I described it to you. Now, the key message which I'm trying to give you here is unlock will solely happen through a gesture, which can be your biometrics or PIN, and it is going to work on asymmetric encryption, which is a certificate-based encryption. Now, as I said, another key message which I want to provide here is keys are always generated in the hardware, which is the TPM, and hardware-bound keys are attested to Trusted Computing Group protocol. A single unlock gesture is kind of enabling this to happen. Now you might ask me how this is 2FA, because the reason why this is 2FA is because there's a gesture which is involved, and then in the background it is unlocking the key from the TPM. So your physical presence is important. Okay, I'm going to cover one more slide on Windows Hello for Business, and I see there are quite a few questions, so I'll try to take those questions. Now, some might argue that, you know what, with Windows Hello for Business, the PIN is very simple. Sometimes you might keep a 6-digit PIN. Now, if someone sees my PIN, then he might be able to he might be able to log in. But the concept here is the PIN is tied to the device. So the PIN is exclusive for the device, and that is not something which can leave the device. Okay, so what it means is if there's an attacker which is behind you while you are entering the password, and if he sees the PIN, he is not going to be able to use the same PIN to log in from another machine. Okay, that is something which is not possible. Now, hypothetically, okay, imagine a scenario wherein the attacker stole your PIN. He saw what you were entering, and then he stole your device also. He stole your device also. So there are a couple of ways you could still protect it. Since your device is Azure AD registered, you can remove the Azure AD registration for your device. You can mark it uncompliant. And if you're using certificates through your internal PKI, you might be able to revoke those certificates also. However, it is still very good because what I'm trying to show by this diagram is the PIN is not integrated with Active Directory. What used to happen with passwords is that if in case the password gets compromised, then he might use the same password from another machine to log in. In this case, that is something which can't happen. Okay, he can't even use that PIN to set up Windows Hello for Business on another device. So that is something which just doesn't work. So the PIN is local to the device and it remains on the device. Okay, so it's not like password wherein if you know the PIN, then you can use it somewhere else. Similar to how your ATM cards are, right? Your card and PIN work together. Okay, someone who would know your PIN might not be able to use your card. Okay, I'm just going to take a few questions. Is PIN of Windows Hello? Yes, PIN would be considered as passwordless. If system is compromised on which Windows Hello for Business then? Okay. Does Hello has any console feature that admin can reset PIN in case the user forgets? There is a PIN reset tool which you can get using which you can reset. How is this related to PKI? Because it uses public key infrastructure, which is certificate-based authentication, which is asymmetric key encryption. That's how it is related to PKI. How passwordless will work for any intranet site where user is supposed to supply password? This is something which will work because the application when you access some website, which is an intranet website, okay, you are not authenticate. I mean, sure, you're authenticating against that application, but the environment for the authentication is provided by the domain controller. Okay, so you don't pass credentials to the application. Okay, you pass credentials to the domain controller, and the domain controller works on Kerberos protocol, which Windows Hello for Business support. So that is something which will work out. Okay. I see one hand up. Udaya, you can ask your question. If in case you have already shared it in the chat, you can let me know.
Yeah, actually I have shared, but you have skipped.
Okay, thank you. So I'll move on. If you have any question, feel free to put it in the chat. I just want to maintain the flow of the presentation so it makes it easier for all of us. The second experience, which I'm going to talk about, is the Microsoft Authenticator app. Now, again, a passwordless scenario. Because remember, we are not in the world wherein a user is accessing applications only from the office or only from the desktop. There could be many other places the users might access the application. Gone are those days wherein it was a particular network wherein user would access the application. We are not living in that kind of world anymore. We are living in a world wherein users are accessing things from anywhere in the world. Now, the Microsoft Authenticator app is the passwordless solution from Microsoft. This experience of going passwordless is using the Microsoft Authenticator app. Now, what happens is most of the organizations which are already on Azure AD, they just have to upgrade their some configuration in the Authenticator app for push notifications. And this is something which can help them to get a full passwordless experience. Now, what happens here is If you try to access any application, it's a standard-based MFA authentication. Now, in this case, what happens is it checks, of course, the application which you're accessing, the machine which you're accessing, if that is compliant. If that is compliant, then it's going to give you a challenge, MFA challenge. You do this MFA challenge, and then you're able to log in. So this is the kind of scenario which you're using for accessing it through mobile apps. Now, the third way of doing this, no, actually, this is not the third way. Actually, all these three are the ways you would achieve it. So you would need all of these three combined. So the third part of this passwordless journey is your FIDO security keys. Okay, so FIDO stands for Fast Identity Online, and it is a FIDO alliance that has created standards based on password authentication methods using two common protocols, basically WebAuthn and CTAP. This is something which you might use for your mobile users, as I said. So if there's a user who doesn't have a dedicated hardware, you might ask me that, I have a user who keeps, they don't have dedicated workstations, right? And then I don't want passwords for those users also. I want them to be passwordless. How do I go about it? Okay, because I don't have dedicated workstations. Like maybe it's a call center, BPO kind of a setup, wherein people come in shifts and then you have desktops. But of course, the number of people using the same desktops are three, and sometimes people keep shuffling between desktops. How do you go about it? The answer is FIDO devices. So these are open standards that allow broad range of customer scenarios, and these are provided by several industry vendors. Uh, and these FIDO2 security devices are typically used in USB or NFC format. Some of the example could be like Ubico or Fatian or N-Security or HID. These are some of the vendors, and I'm sure there are quite a few, but I have included these only in the presentation. Now, as you can see, the key is registered against Azure Active Directory or Active Directory, and then you are able to use these devices to be able to log in. I don't see it making sense for users with dedicated workstations because you're really able to do it without these keys using Windows Hello for Business. But for those users who are mobile, who have non-dedicated workstations, then it might make sense for you to use it. Okay. Uh, Now, just reiterating the fact, okay, and just trying to summarize how it all works. So the architecture of Windows Hello for Business is really simple and it's really common. Not Windows Hello for Business, but the passwordless architecture. It is based on the public key technology, which is the key pair kind of a technology. So private keys are securely stored on the device, and then you require some kind of gesture to be able to unlock these keys. Now, private keys are bound to a single device, and that is something which gets never shared with any other device. So that's something which is bound to a single device, and of course, you have ability to unlock it. So that's the simple fundamental based on which how this works. Now, what can you do to go ahead and start your passwordless journey? I described this to you at high level when I presented how you can go about this journey earlier. But in general, from a technology perspective, uh, you need to enable Azure Active Directory. You need to sign up for Azure MFA and self-service password reset for all users in the organization. Identify and update apps to allow Azure Active Directory authentication. Think about your hardware and devices if they support TPM. And most of the modern day devices, from what I can remember since last 4-5 years, all of them, they support TPM. And of course, start with a pilot, deploy Windows Hello for Business rollout, try the Authenticator app and phone sign-in, prepare for FIDO2 security keys with some deskless or kiosk worker, and that's how you can go about it. There is a bunch of resources which you can access and get this information from. So I have just listed few which is related to the overall passwordless deployment guide, and then I have listed for Windows Hello for Business as well. Okay, so that's pretty much it, what I wanted to share. I just want to see if there is any question. Okay. How can we enter PIN or password screen share? Unfortunately, I'm not able to do screen share. Yeah. I don't know if there are any questions. Maybe you can raise your hand up and we can take it one at a time.
So I was asking about that if I want to enter the password, if someone is sharing a screen, so how we can give on this scenario?
Someone is. I didn't get. Can you
No,
rephrase the
like
question?
if someone is sharing a screen, like a team screen sharing, and I have to enter a password on that someone's screen over the screen share.
Yeah, let's take an example that so help desk have taken a screen share and we need to enter the password.
Yeah.
Okay, so you want to enter a password on someone else's machine?
Yeah.
No. So ideally, I wouldn't do that. But I'll tell you how Windows Hello for Business is going to support you. You might be able to do it using RDP sessions. So if you rather take a remote desktop, then you might be able to do it. I don't think you would be able to do it on screen sharing. It would depend on what kind of screen sharing app you're using and what kind of permission it has to your system.
Like Teams screen sharing.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that is something which would work.
Okay.
Yeah. I see Firoz Khan has his hand up. Firoz.
So generally this happen at the time of the team we were sharing in kind of as we all working work from home, and that at that same time we have to put our password or someone's password. That time it is chances to stolen, na?
Yes. So, okay. So you are talking about administrator. So I think maybe but mainly Windows Hello for Business is for your tier 2 workstations primarily. I do see that, a lot of times admins generally who was doing remote work, they might have to do it. For this, we have a separate solution called as labs. With labs, what you can do is you can randomize your passwords, and after you enter your password once, then the password changes, and then you might have to redo refine the password again. So that is something which you can use in that kind of scenario. But generally, for like where Windows Hello for Business would come in would be to help you against machine logons, server logons, server administration. That is where it can help you. When you want to see or when you want to troubleshoot any issues on the client machines, maybe you can use the labs methodology to go ahead and troubleshoot those things.
Okay, thanks.
I see one more hand up. Firoz, I believe you have already asked. So, Udaya?
Sir, actually, you are saying that we need to enter into passwordless or this is only for when we are logging, or else this is completely related to passwordless to while we are using websites also.
Yes. So see here, when I say passwordless, I'm not talking about the I'm talking more from an organization perspective. Okay. So from your organization perspective, for you to access any of your organizational apps, your emails, your tools, for accessing any of those from an end user perspective, you can go passwordless. So they're like your HR application or your finance application or some of the other things, or logging into your machine, or logging into your email, all of this experience can be passwordless. So any company apps can be without passwords.
Okay, so thank you.
Yeah. If you remember now, or if you have noticed, even LinkedIn started this to some extent, wherein what they're doing is they're trying to go passwordless, wherein they're sending you some link on your email to be able to log in. So that's like you're going without password. Because so often it happens, your Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, they get compromised. So even they are trying to go passwordless, wherein they are sending links on your email, assuming your emails are secure, and then you're trying to access it. Okay, Avinash, you have a question?
Yeah, it's regarding to the system only. If system gets compromised on which the Hello for Business is there, then in that case.
Yes, that's a good question. So what happens is, if the system gets compromised, then you can still not know the private key, because the private key is something which is stored in the chip, okay, which is the TPM. Now, what the attacker might be able to do is he might have access to the session cookies and those kind of things, which he still might be able to leverage. And then he would try to penetrate further. But then what it is doing is he can't use a machine other than this to log into another machine. You understand what I'm trying to say? So what happens is, like the attack vector which we observed in the first part of the presentation, what the attacker did is he attacked one machine. He managed to get the credential of local admin, and then he used the same credential to log in to another machine. This is something which the attacker will not be able to do now, because the password is not a password anymore. It is stored in the form of private key, and it is stored securely in the TPM of the device.
What about the resources? He can use those resources which the user has been allocated with.
See, if he manages to compromise, so he'll not compromise the user, but he will compromise that session probably. And in that session, of course, he might be able to use some of these other resources which the user has access to. Where it prevents him is, where Windows Hello for Business is really preventing it is phishing. Okay, so what happens in phishing? In phishing, what happens is user gets a prompt for credential, right? And then the users enter their password. In this case, the users are not going to enter password. So phishing constitutes to about 21% of the attacks overall, 23% of the attacks overall. So phishing, it will be very difficult to happen here because there is no password. So when there's no password, how will you phish? The second thing which this is going to prevent is lateral movement. When you don't know the password, how will you move laterally? You will not be able to move laterally.
Okay.
Swaprakash, you have a question?
Yeah. So basically, how this passwordless will work for the, RDP sessions, or that is only for the local machine?
Yes, that's a good question. It continues to work for RDP session. It can work for your Azure Virtual Desktop also. So you can use that.
Okay, suppose I logged into my machine with the Windows with the passwordless, and then I try to log into one more machine with a. So in that case, should I use the password or the Windows Hello for Business passwordless only will work for me? I'm not getting this thing.
No, so you will have both the options. Okay. Now it is totally dependent on how your environment supports. Now I understand where you're coming from. You're talking mainly from an administration perspective.
Yeah.
So you can use it's not that it is going to force you for RDP sessions also. You need to use passwordless. Of course, there are policies which you can define for it to be forced. But of course, if it's a need, you would potentially be able to use passwords also.
Okay, and from where this policy
it can be pushed
will be
through,
defined?
Yeah, it can be
Intune?
pushed through Intune, or it can be pushed through group policies.
Okay, got it.
Yeah,
thank you. Yeah,
Kanhaiya, I see you have a question.
Yes, sir. It is not related to Azure, but I have this question. Suppose any small organization have a server setup, local AD setup, and most of user are admin in tier, as we discussed in our first session. If that particular system got compromised, that time, is it any way to we can prevent the particular system if or there are any IT person not available in the company at that time, sir?
Okay, so that's a very broad question, Kanhaiya, but I'll try to answer it. Okay, so here we are mainly talking about preventing something, or something is compromised, and then we are talking about so there are three phases from a security framework perspective: protect, detect, and respond. Okay, Windows Hello for Business is mainly a proactive thing, so this is something which would come into protect phase. But let's assume we are not talking about Windows Hello for Business. It's the general scenario wherein a machine gets compromised. Now, the first thing which you would need to do is to be able to detect that the machine gets compromised. Now, there are various ways to detect it. The Microsoft way of detecting it, it would be through, if it's a client machine, it would be through Defender for Endpoint, and you might be able to see authentication using Defender for Identity. So these are the two tools essentially which might help you in defending against these attacks. And then the response strategy can vary. Like a lot of response or remediation, that is something which can be done by Defender for Endpoint also. A lot of this can be automated as well, like automated hunting and automated resolution can also be pushed through Defender for Endpoint. So that is something which is possible, which might not require user intervention also.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay, Deep, I see you have a question.
Yeah, so I was looking like Azure portal. Like I want to log into multiple VMs on that. So will it be possible to log in via this?
So okay, so you are talking about log on through Azure portal.
Yeah, so multiple VM. I want to log into 5 VMs or 10 VMs on the Azure portal. So
How are you going to log into these machines? Like without Windows Hello for Business?
Yeah, I want to log in via Windows Hello. Is it possible?
Yes. So yes and no. I'll tell you how. So if you have some servers in Azure, okay, then naturally you would log into your servers in Azure. Typically, there are multiple ways to log into the server in Azure. One of them is through RDP, which will work through Windows Hello for Business. Okay. The other, there are a couple of other ways. There could be a way using serial console, which is more command based. That is something which is not possible. There are ways to log in using Azure Bastion. That is something which is not possible also. So yeah, so there are some methods which is possible and some methods which might not be possible.
So you mean to say like RDP will work perfectly?
Yes, RDP will work with Windows Hello.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, Hanuman, I see you have a question.
Yes, hi. I mean, basically, more into admin, okay, for SQL and, bit on Azure part. So my question is like, we tried implementing managed identities for running a few of the services. Okay, can we try implementing passwordless for service accounts, basically where we are responsible for running services? It may be on Azure data pipelines or any other.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and we have a concept of service principal in Azure, but Windows Hello for Business is not meant for services or anything like that. That's a different technology. What we are talking about more from a user perspective. Service account, we have different things. Like we have group managed service account, which resets their passwords automatically in the background, and then we have got service principals in Azure. But yeah, Windows Hello for Business is not related to that.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Okay, I'll take one final question. Pankaj.
Hello, sir. So I have a question like how we can integrate this Windows Hello and MFA, and we also use the labs with that. How we can means more secure the labs because labs is going to store the password in the clear text, right, in the AD. So how we can make it as a multi-factor? We can.
Okay, so see the so Windows Hello for Business is already MFA. Okay, so you don't need to integrate another solution on top of Windows Hello for Business. However, if there is a need for you to do it, you could still do it. Now, I know like some of these vendors, what they do is they work with the WinLog On service, and after you have logged on, they add additional factor. But for me, there is no need to add another layer of MFA. Over Windows Hello for Business. Okay, first of all. Second, Labs is for local admin randomization. Okay, it is different. than what we are talking about. Okay, we are talking about removing user credentials. But what happens is when you provision a Windows machines, there is a default administrator which gets created. What we try to do is we try to randomize this. The reason for randomization is, of course, to prevent lateral movements from happening across the organization. That is the core intent of randomizing, of labs, basically. Now, with this, what a lot of organizations has done is, and in fact, Microsoft also has an IP wherein what we do is we restrict the access of labs to a specific set of group. Okay, and this is something which we control using MFA. So what we do is we build a website, and in that website, for you to be able to access it, you need to be MFA'd, and only then you are able to access it. Now, what we do is post this access, you could trigger an automation wherein the password, once the password is read of a machine, it would get reset after 2 hours. That is something which could happen. So this is how you prevent your local admins and you prevent your attacker to move laterally by just randomizing your local admins.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I'll take one more question. I don't know. Deep, I believe you already asked, right? Deep Hanuman. How does FIDO2 security keys work and what happens if the user misplaces the security device? Yeah, that's a good question. Honestly, I'm not an expert with FIDO2 keys because it's more of a third party, and then there are different vendors who might have separate guidance as to how would you revoke these keys. But of course, there are mechanisms for you to be able to revoke if the user replaces the key. And you're right, it can happen so many times. I know that back then when I was not with Microsoft, few years back, like maybe 7 years back, I was working with an organization, and at that time, um, we used to get some tokens, okay, which was like a small key-shaped tokens, and then a lot of people used to misplace those tokens. So what I did is I used to put them into my ID card just to be sure that I don't misplace it. So I know that kind of thing can happen, but I'm sure different vendors would have different mechanism to have ability to revoke. Okay, Manish, my apologies. I know you asked this question before and I was supposed to get back to you. So my tier 0 domain controller is in private network, specially access from own environment. If attacker wants to access tier 0 environment, how he will get into the private network? That's a good question. Let me try to take 2 minutes and try to answer you this, okay? And I'm going to share my same whiteboard with you to try and answer this. Okay, so to answer your question here, Manish, so of course, when I try to show you some segregation here, the purpose of showing segregation was because they are in different networks. Now, how can you prevent yourself from, how do you prevent yourself from being, how can you prevent your domain controllers from being attacked? So there are two things which happened here, okay, which caused problems for us. One thing was lateral movement, which can be prevented by labs. And the second thing which happened was privileged escalation. Okay, privileged escalation happened because this user which was sitting here, he was using the same machine to access the domain controller. This can be prevented if we have tier 0 admin workstations. Okay, what we call them is we call them PAW. Okay, we call them privileged access workstation for tier 0. So if you use dedicated tier 0 workstation to access your domain controller, what this can prevent is it can prevent the attacker from elevating from here to here because you're not using this machine here. So even in a scenario wherein you get compromised, the attacker move here and here and here, but If everything is right, it will be very difficult for him to elevate. So this is something which he'll not be able to do. It will be very difficult for him to elevate because he doesn't have a path to elevate. So this is something which can be avoided if you keep them in a separate network and if you use separate workstations to administer. If you use this workstation to administer your tier 0, for example, most definitely if attacker compromises this workstation, he will compromise your domain controller. So a way to prevent this, one of the ways to prevent this is by using some dedicated workstations here for tier 0 access. So that is something which will prevent you. Hope that answers the question. Kasam, I think we are good.
Also, thank you, Zoeb. Thank you. Bye bye.